Hello, and welcome to Quiet Case. I hope you've been well, and that life has been treating you gently. Take a moment, wherever you are, to let the calm wash over you. Whether you're wrapped up in bed, cozy in your favorite chair, or winding down after a long day, I invite you to settle in and prepare for another journey into a mystery, one that will unfold slowly and peacefully. Tonight's case takes us to a quiet village in Finland, where a young woman's disappearance has haunted a community for decades. It's a story of a life interrupted, of unanswered questions that still linger in the forests and fields of Isojoki. I'd like to hear where you're listening from, whether it's from the quiet of your home or from somewhere else in the world. Know that you are joining me in a quiet, shared space. As we begin, close your eyes if you can. Feel the stillness of the world around you, and let the story of Kyllikki Saari guide you through the shadows of history, as her mysterious fate remains unsolved to this day. Chapter 1. The Peaceful Village of Isojoki. The story begins in a quiet, peaceful village deep in the Finnish countryside. Isojoki. The name itself evokes a calmness, a river that winds gently through the land, giving life to the fields, forests, and people who call this place home. In the mid-20th century, Isojoki was a rural village, the kind where the pace of life slowed with the seasons. Its residents worked on farms, gathered at the church for service, and lived simply but contentedly. This was the world in which Kyllikki Saari grew up. Born in 1936, she was the eldest child in her family, and her life had always been one of simplicity and devotion. She attended the local school and spent her days with friends, family, and the community that knew her well. Kyllikki was known for her gentle nature and thoughtful demeanor. There was something quietly captivating about her, an innate kindness that drew people to her. She was particularly close to her family, and her faith was at the center of her life. As was typical in her small town, Kyllikki attended church services regularly, where she sang hymns with a sweet, clear voice. It was on one such Sunday evening, May 17th, 1953, that Kyllikki would leave the church after Mass, and like many nights before, she would ride her bicycle home through the familiar landscape of Isojoki. The weather that evening was typical for late spring, with cool winds and a sky that seemed both vast and endless. The church bells had just finished ringing, their soft echoes fading as Kyllikki made her way out of the church, stepping out into the cool embrace of the night. But little did anyone know, this would be the last time she was seen alive.
Chapter 2. The Disappearance. Kyllikki's disappearance was immediate, almost eerie in its suddenness. Her parents, accustomed to their daughter's punctuality, did not expect her to be late. As the evening passed and Kyllikki had not returned home, concern grew. Her mother, Annie, began to grow anxious. By the time it was fully dark, her father, Juhani, went outside to call her name into the still night.
Nothing. Not a sound. Not even the rustle of the trees in the distance. Kyllikki's absence was more than unusual. It was a sign that something had gone terribly wrong. After an hour passed, Juhani began walking the roads between their home and the church, calling out for her. But the silence returned only his voice. He began to worry, an icy fear settling into his bones. He had no reason to think that anything was amiss, but Kyllikki was never late. Not by this much. As the hours turned into an anxious wait, the small village of Isojoki was thrown into quiet chaos. Kyllikki's mother grew frantic, searching nearby areas while the rest of the village gathered together, lighting lanterns and calling for her. It wasn't long before they realized that something more sinister was at play. Kyllikki's bike had not returned home either, and there were no signs of her anywhere along the roads. The village, a place once defined by quiet, rhythmic routines, now felt unsettlingly empty. People formed search parties, gathering at the church before fanning out into the darkening world. They combed through the streets and fields, desperately hoping for a sign. But it was as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. No footprints, no traces, only the stark emptiness of the Finnish night.
Chapter 3. Searching the Forests. In the early hours of the following morning, the search for Kyllikki took on a new urgency. The people of Iso-Joki, alongside the local police, began searching the forests that bordered the village. These were dense, dark places, with towering trees that seemed to shield the world from the sun. The ground was thick with moss and leaves, and the air was cool and damp with the remnants of spring rain. Yet, despite hours of searching, the search parties found nothing. It seemed impossible. Kyllikki couldn't have simply disappeared. Not in a village this small. Not in a place where everyone knew each other's routines. But still, she was nowhere to be found. Weeks passed. The search expanded beyond Iso-Joki, but no trace of Kyllikki turned up. People began to ask questions, their voices tinged with disbelief. Was it possible that Kyllikki had simply run away? That perhaps she had left to start a new life elsewhere? But the more the searchers dug into the case, the more they realized. This wasn't a simple disappearance. It was a mystery that no one could unravel. The weeks turned to months, and the hope of finding Kyllikki alive began to fade. The quiet village had lost its peace. In place of the community's harmony was a pervasive, unsettling tension that seemed to grow stronger with every unanswered question. Chapter 4. The discovery of the bicycle. In the months following Kyllikki's disappearance, a faint glimmer of hope emerged. On June 17th, a month after Kyllikki vanished, her bicycle was discovered, abandoned along a remote stretch of road outside the village. The sight of the bike caused a stir of both relief and dread. On the one hand, it meant that Kyllikki had been nearby, at least at some point. On the other hand, it suggested that something sinister had happened. Her bike had been abandoned, but where was she? The bike was found lying in a small ditch at the edge of a meadow, its wheels still and silent. No sign of a struggle, no evidence of what had occurred. It was as though Kyllikki had simply stepped off her bike and vanished into thin air. This discovery reignited the search efforts, but the bike, much like every other clue, only seemed to deepen the mystery. Was she taken against her will? Or had she met some kind of accident? With no further clues, the village began to feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly, each passing day only adding to the collective uncertainty. Chapter 5. The Hunt for Answers.
By the end of the summer, no closer to an answer, the people of Iso-Joki were growing weary.
Kyllikki's case had become a point of quiet speculation, with rumors circulating about what might have happened. Some whispered of a mysterious man who had been seen lurking near the church in the days before her disappearance. Others spoke of strange happenings in the village, as if the land itself was hiding secrets it didn't want to share. One theory was that Kyllikki had been taken by someone familiar to her, someone who knew the land well, someone who had carefully planned her disappearance. But no one knew who that person could be. The only thing that was clear was that Kyllikki had not simply vanished. She had been taken. As autumn arrived, the case began to take on the quiet melancholy that now lingered over Iso-Joki. The days grew shorter, and the landscape turned from green to golden, before fading into the grey of winter. Yet still, no answers came. The village moved on, but Kyllikki's absence remained, a quiet, unresolved wound. Chapter 6. The Priests and Suspicions. As the investigation dragged on, one name began to appear again and again in the whispers of the village. Väinö K, the local priest. Väinö was known for his somewhat odd demeanor, often speaking in vague terms and acting distant from the villagers. He had a quiet but unsettling air about him. His behavior was certainly peculiar, but could it have been the mark of guilt? Väinö had been seen near the church on the night of Kyllikki's disappearance, and many wondered if he knew more than he let on. His presence in the village, so close to the time of Kyllikki's vanishing, could not be ignored. Some speculated that he had been involved in some way, while others dismissed it as coincidence. But as the investigation wore on, Väinö became more of a central figure in the case. Despite multiple interrogations, Väinö's answers were inconsistent. He seemed evasive, and his mannerisms raised even more suspicions. But the police found no physical evidence connecting him to Kyllikki's disappearance. The case remained a labyrinth of theory and doubt. Chapter 7. The search intensifies. The failure to find Kyllikki was a heavy blow to both the police and the people of Isojoki. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the search became less hopeful. But something about Kyllikki's case, her disappearance from such a small, tight-knit community, refused to let the village rest. The silence in Isojoki became increasingly uncomfortable, like the world had stopped turning and was waiting for something to happen. The young woman who had once been at the heart of this village was now the very reason it felt so empty. As time went on, the police decided to expand the search, going further and deeper into the surrounding wilderness. They brought in trackers, experts in locating missing persons, and even volunteers from other towns who were eager to help. The surrounding forest was vast, a tangled expanse of trees and underbrush that had always been both a source of life and mystery for the villagers. It was the kind of place where one could easily lose themselves, where secrets could hide for generations. One search party ventured deep into the forest, walking for miles through thick vegetation. They checked every small clearing, every hidden corner where Kyllikki's presence might have left a trace. The search grew more methodical, with teams combing through the forests in straight lines, covering each possible route. The local police, who had once believed Kyllikki may have simply wandered off, now began to consider darker possibilities. The absence of her body, and the strange way the search had turned up nothing, suggested she had been taken. But taken by who, and for what reason? Despite the efforts, weeks turned into months, and by the time winter crept into the land, the snow covered the earth in a cold blanket, hiding everything beneath it. Kyllikki's case had become a cold one, shrouded in the mystery of the Finnish countryside. Still, no trace of her was found, no footprints, no clothing, no signs of struggle. The frustration was palpable. The police began to focus on possible suspects, but the village itself seemed too small for a stranger to have slipped in without notice. Every theory they explored, every search they launched, brought them back to the same point. Kyllikki had vanished, and no one knew why or how. Chapter 8. The discovery of the body. Then, 5 long months after Kyllikki's disappearance, something shifted. It was a typical cold day in November when a peat cutter named Eero found Kyllikki's body. He had been working alone in the bog, a remote area several kilometers from Isojoki. The bog was a dark, damp place, the kind of place that seemed to hide secrets, where the earth was thick with layers of peat, and where even the most determined workers could lose their bearings. As Eero dug into the soil, he felt something hard beneath his shovel. Thinking it was a rock, he pushed harder, only to realize that what he had uncovered was much more significant. It was the body of a young woman. Eero's heart raced as he realized who it was. He quickly alerted the authorities, and soon the area was crawling with police officers and investigators. The small village of Isojoki was once again in turmoil, as everyone hoped that this discovery would finally bring answers. But the body was strangely untouched by time. Kyllikki's clothing was still intact, almost as if she had been placed there carefully. Her hair was neatly arranged, and there were no obvious signs of trauma. At first glance, it didn't seem like she had been a victim of violence. But as investigators examined her body, they discovered a dark truth. The cause of her death was not immediately clear. There were no visible wounds, no bruises, nothing that could explain the life that had been taken so prematurely. The discovery of Kyllikki's body did little to quell the growing unease. If anything, it deepened the mystery. Who could have done this? And why? And more hauntingly, why had Kyllikki's body been hidden so carefully, buried in the bog? The questions remained unanswered, leaving the village in a new kind of silence. A silence that was filled with dread. Chapter 9. The Unanswered Questions. Despite the discovery of Kyllikki's body, the unanswered questions surrounding her death loomed larger than ever. The police immediately launched a new investigation. But this time, things were different. The small village of Isojoki had never experienced such a mysterious and horrific event. The villagers were shaken to their core, struggling to make sense of what had happened to Kyllikki, whose death had left a hole in their lives that could never be filled. The absence of visible injuries to Kyllikki's body left the investigators grasping at straws. Was she poisoned? Did she die from some unknown cause, only for her body to be hidden by someone who knew the land well? The bog, which had once been a place of quiet utility for the peat cutters, had now become a symbol of something darker, a place where secrets were buried, waiting to be discovered. The lack of physical evidence meant that detectives had to rely on interviews, rumors, and witness testimonies. They spoke with people who had seen Kyllikki in the days before her disappearance, trying to piece together her final moments. Yet, there were no clear leads. Everyone who knew her swore that she had been a good, kind person, a young woman who wouldn't have any enemies. Theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some believed Kyllikki had been abducted by someone she knew, possibly someone who had been watching her from the shadows. Others suggested that she might have stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time, and that her death had been an accident, concealed to cover up a crime. But the more the investigators dug into her life, the less certain they became. Every path they took seemed to lead nowhere. The small village, which had once been filled with life and warmth, now seemed like a place where every smile concealed a secret, and every handshake was tainted by suspicion. Chapter 10. Theories and Suspects. As the months passed and the investigation seemed to stall, the theories surrounding Kyllikki's death began to evolve. Isojoki, a village that had once been united, now divided over what had happened to the young woman. Each theory brought with it new suspicions, some of which cast doubt on the very people who had once been considered innocent. One of the most persistent theories was that Kyllikki had been abducted by someone she knew, someone who had been familiar with her daily routines. This theory was supported by the fact that no signs of a struggle had been found near her bicycle, and her body had been carefully hidden in the bog. It was as if whoever had taken her had wanted to conceal her death in the most subtle and deliberate way possible. Suspicion naturally fell on Väinö K, the local priest. Väinö had been seen near the church on the evening of Kyllikki's disappearance. He was a somewhat eccentric figure, known for his peculiar behavior. Some people remembered how he had seemed distracted and aloof in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Others recalled strange moments where Väinö had acted as though he were trying to avoid direct eye contact or conversation with certain members of the congregation. Despite being questioned multiple times, Väinö denied any involvement in Kyllikki's disappearance. There were no solid leads connecting him to the crime, but his odd behavior and the timing of his whereabouts left many questioning his true role in the mystery. Other suspects included people who had been seen near the church, as well as a few strangers who had wandered through the village in the days before Kyllikki went missing. The idea that Kyllikki had been abducted by someone unfamiliar with her life was unsettling. A random act of violence in the middle of the Finnish countryside seemed impossible, but not entirely out of the realm of possibility. Each theory, however, was left unproven, and no one person stood out as the key to solving Kyllikki's death. As the years passed, the case seemed to fade from the forefront of the villagers' minds, but the whispers of suspicion never truly died. Chapter 11. The Legacy of Isojoki. Kyllikki's legacy in Isojoki is one of lingering grief and mystery. She is remembered by the people who once knew her, a young woman with a bright future ahead of her, whose life was tragically cut short. The silence in Isojoki never truly left. It became the kind of quiet that clung to every corner, reminding the villagers that not all stories have clear endings. In the years that followed, the case was reopened by police, though it remained unsolved. Theories still swirled in the community. Every year, when the anniversary of Kyllikki's death approached, the village seemed to hold its breath, and the past would return, unsettling everything once more. Kyllikki Saari's story is a haunting reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some secrets, it seems, are buried so deeply that they may never see the light of day again. Her legacy lives on in the questions that continue to haunt the people of Isojoki. Who killed Kyllikki Saari, and why? What happened to her on that quiet spring night? And why, after all these years, does her disappearance still leave the people of Isojoki with a sense of incompleteness, as if the story is still waiting to be told? Thank you for joining me tonight. As you drift off to sleep, let the quiet of this mystery settle with you. Some questions, no matter how hard we try, may never have clear answers. But it's the searching for them that brings us together in moments like these. Sweet dreams, and until next time, sleep well.